Good morning, everyone. This is Professor Muhammad Farghal. On this lecture, I'll be talking about politeness theory. The management of politeness in human interaction is a very interesting phenomenon. And the principle of politeness has been mentioned by many theorists in pragmatics. Grice, for example, so that the politeness principle goes hand in hand with the cooperative principle. And in fact, some of his conversational implicatures that are explained by his maxims, especially the maxim of quantity, can also be explained in terms of politeness. For example, when you are under-informative for some communicative purpose, this, in addition to flouting the maxim of quantity, which I have discussed in my other lecture on conversational implicatures, it also involves the principle of politeness. For example, when you respond to your student's question about her term paper, that I like your folder, here you are under-informative, and we explain this in terms of flouting the maxim of quantity, but also we can explain it in terms of politeness, that you have opted for this kind of response in order not to hurt your student's feelings. So instead of telling her that your term paper is not good enough or your term paper is a piece of nonsense or garbage, you don't want to hurt her feelings. That's why you have opted for commenting on something that is marginal. And from your comment, your student would give the message that her term paper is not good enough. Leach also, in his theory of pragmatics, has emphasized the principle of politeness. Politeness in pragmatics refers to linguistic politeness rather than politeness in general. So we are not interested in generally describing someone as a polite person. We are interested in what the person says and how he marks his utterances for politeness. So our interest is in linguistic politeness rather than in politeness as a generally social phenomenon. This simply means that when we express different propositions when asking people to do things for us, we mark our utterances for politeness. And notice that the term politeness implies its opposite, that is impoliteness. So one can be either polite or impolite. If, for example, you are offended by something done by one of your students in class, and you want him or her to leave class, you may make the request in many different ways, depending on what you want when it comes to politeness, or depending on your psychological mood. Do you want to order the student to leave class, or do you want to request him? to leave class? Or do you want to say something indirect from which the student can understand that he should leave class? Okay, these are different options. Get out of class immediately. Now, this is one way of doing it boldly, without worrying about politeness. Will you please leave class immediately? This is marked for politeness. One can even go further than this. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave class immediately. Or I don't know how to put it, but I'll have to ask you to leave class now. Not that all of these utterances make some request of the student, and they vary in the degree of politeness, ranging between impolite and extremely polite. The teacher can even go further than that by making the request indirectly rather than directly, by saying something from which the student can understand that he should leave class. For example, something like, what would one do if he does something like that, addressing the student? And the student might just get up and leave class, understanding that the teacher wants him to leave class. And this is done by way of interpreting what the speaker has said. The speaker has not made the request explicitly. He has made the request indirectly. But the student, right, taking the situation into consideration, the student would get the message and leave class. The key concept in politeness theory, as expounded by Brown and Levinson back in 1978, is the term FTA, abbreviating a face-threatening act, familiarly known as FTA. Note that F here stands for face. And this relates to the familiar expressions in English, as well as in Arabic, the terms safe face and loose face in English, and يحتفظ بماء الوجه ويفقد ماء الوجه in Arabic. It is basically the same idea. This simply means that each of us has face wants, and we want to usually save face rather than lose face. You don't want to look bad. And that's how politeness behavior is managed, all right, in order to what? To strike a balance between saving face and losing face. Politeness must be looked at or examined in terms of three variables. One should not lose sight of these three variables. These are the variables of distance, power, and rate or degree of imposition. These three variables govern the way we manage politeness in the course of interaction. Distance refers to whether the distance between speaker and hearer or speaker and interlocutor is narrow or great. And depending on the kind of distance, we mark our FTAs for politeness. If you are addressing a close friend or a family member, then you would do this informally usually by using an endearing term like honey, for example. A mother addressing her daughter, honey, get me a drink of water. By contrast, if you are addressing someone on the street, you are doing the FTA on the street, addressing a stranger. It's very unlikely you would use something like honey or darling. You have to address the stranger formally by using a title of address or a different politeness strategy. Excuse me, sir. Could you tell me where the post office is? Excuse me, sir. This indicates that the distance between the speaker and the interlocutor is great. And that's why the speaker opts for such strategy, which contrasts with the honey strategy when a mother addresses her daughter, or the other way around, a daughter addressing her mother, or when you are addressing a close friend. My dear friend June, give me $5. Okay, why? Because the distance between you and the interlocutor here is very narrow. This contrasts with the distance between student and professor. That's why the student addressing his professor should use a title of address. Dr. Farghal, I have a question here. Would he address me by my first name? Muhammad, I have a question here. Yeah, this is kind of bizarre. And it's very unlikely. Why? Because the distance between the student and the professor is supposed to be great. And this is also supplemented by power. Note that when it comes to speaker stranger, power is not there. But when it comes to student professor or student teacher, we have both. We have distance and power. Here, the professor has power. The student lacks power. That's why the professor addresses his students by their first names. But the students address their professor by a title of address. And the last variable here is the size of the FTA. How big is the FTA? Is it a big FTA, a big favor, or a small one? Note that this might override the other two variables. If you're asking someone to lend you $5, yeah, this is a small favor. The FTA is very small. But if you're asking him to lend you $1,000 rather than $5, then things would be different. And the politeness strategy would be different here. Despite the fact that you are close friends. Hey, big fella, give me $5. No big deal, all right? $5 is no big deal, but you wouldn't do it the same way if you're asking for $1,000. You might what? I don't know how to put it, John. Would it be possible for you to lend me $1,000? Or you might even do it indirectly. I'm financially stuck these days. Would you be kind enough to lend me $1,000? Or now this has been done directly, but you may, all right, you may just hint at your desire to borrow money from John by saying, I am financially stuck these days. I don't know what to do. And you are expecting your friend John to offer help here. Okay, now, so these three variables should never be lost sight of when conducting politeness in communication. They govern our politeness behavior. Now, Brown and Levinson's theory talks about politeness strategies in some detail. It's true that the other variables are there, but in addition to these three umbrella kind of variables, we have some specific strategies we adopt when conducting politeness behavior, when doing FTAs. The first option is to do the FTA, but sometimes we have the FTA, but we don't do it. And I think most of us have experienced this, if not all of us. All right, you want to ask a favor of someone, and you keep thinking about it, but you end up what? Abandoning this altogether. Why? Because you don't want to lose face. We are not interested in this, simply because this does not involve their verbal behavior. We are interested in the option for doing the FTA, when you do the FTA. When this happens, there are two main options. The first option is to do the FTA directly, or as Brown and Levinson call it, to go on record. And the other option is to do the FTA indirectly or to go off record. So this simply means that we can do FTAs, requests, for example, or asking questions, or whatever threatens your face. This can be done either directly by going on record or indirectly by going off record. When you go on record, you just make the request. John, could you help me with this assignment? I don't know how to handle it. Would you be kind enough to help me with this assignment? My dear friend John, help me with this assignment. I don't know how to put it, but John, could you help me with this assignment? John, I am stuck with this assignment. Don't know what to do. Okay, all these, notice that the last one makes the request indirectly. All right, in other words, by saying, I'm stuck with this. John, I am stuck with this assignment. Don't know what to do. This is a prerequisite. It's not, you are not doing the FTA directly. Here you are doing it indirectly. But you expect your interlocutor here, John, to understand that you need help. And you expect him to offer help here. That's the difference between doing an FTA on record or doing it off record. Not the other option here, or not, it's not. Okay, so we have two options. We have either going on record or going off record. When going on record, there are two options. The FTA can be done without redressive action, or someone may do it without redressive action, without worrying about being polite, or impolitely, or opts to do it with redressive action, or politely. When doing the FTA boldly without redressive action, one is not worried about politeness, and this is what we familiarly call rude, something rude. All right, when you're not worried about being polite. Get out of class immediately. Sit down. I want you to drop this class now. Okay, all of these are done boldly, without redressive action. So this is the first option here, is to do the FTA without redressive action, boldly. The other option is to do the FTA politely or with redressive action. You want to be polite rather than impolite or rude even. And when the speaker decides to do the FTA politely or with redressive action, he has two options: positive politeness and negative politeness. Not that there is nothing negative about negative politeness, this is only a term. Positive politeness and negative politeness differ in their orientation. Positive politeness is oriented towards the speaker's face wants, whereas negative politeness is oriented towards the hearers or the interlocutors' face wants. Notice that each of us has a positive face and a negative face. The positive face involves our desire to be liked by others, something we all seek. And the negative face reflects our desire not to impose on others, not to hinder others. And notice that when opting for being polite, one has to choose between positive politeness or negative politeness. And this is not done haphazardly. In positive politeness, for example, is familiar among close friends, among family members. That's why positive politeness always goes with endearing terms, the use of first names, the use of things like honey, darling, big fella, buddy, man. In Arabic, we have lots of such endearing terms. Habibi, Habibti, Ya Umri, Ya Ruhi, Ya Ba'ad Shabdi, Ya Ayuni. All these are endearing terms. And they go with positive politeness. And they are familiar among close friends, and family members. You would not expect a student to call you Habibi, for example. This would be kind of bizarre or inappropriate. Why? Because, okay, the distance and the power variables are there, and the student should be aware of that. In mother-daughter interaction, honey, get me that chair. Mom, give me $5. Mom, honey. Okay, notice that these are endearing terms, and they go with positive politeness. A student addressing his classmates by their pet names or first names. Ayush, give me your notes. Ayush, for example, pet name for Aisha. Abu Zuz, جيب لي كاست مي. Abu Zuz, for example, addressing my eldest son, Yazid. It says Abu Zuz here is a kind of pet name. Okay, so these expressions, these endearing terms, they go with positive politeness. Complimenting, for example, when you meet your close friend and you see that he's wearing a new suit, would you keep quiet about that? All right, you may, but this would not be appreciated by your friend. Why? Because he expects you to say something nice about his new suit. So, oh, how nice this suit is. Oh, thank you very much. Okay, so this is, all right, this is positive politeness, okay? You want to be liked by your, okay, the desire to be liked by others. So we should be attending to the nice things they have or they do. Negative politeness, by contrast, is oriented towards the interlocutors or the addressees face wants. That's why it's marked by a distancing strategy. You distance yourself from the addressee by marking your FTAs by a high degree of modality. Would you be kind enough to tell me what I'm supposed to do here? Would you be kind enough? Not that this is highly modalized, and this reflects negative politeness. I don't know how to put it, but may I ask you to help me with this assignment? Okay, again, I don't know how to put it. You are doing the FTA directly, but you are adopting negative politeness. I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave class. Or I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave us for a couple of minutes. You are asking someone to leave, but you are adopting here, you are adopting negative politeness. Instead of, for example, a mother addressing her daughter, honey, leave us for a couple of minutes. Okay, this is positive politeness, but I'm afraid I'll have to ask you to leave us for a couple of minutes. This is negative politeness. So negative politeness is characterized by a high degree of modality as well as weirdness. Positive politeness, by contrast, is characterized by the use of endearing terms. And informality. So negative politeness is very familiar when the distance is great and when there is also a power difference. For example, okay, a high-ranking officer versus a recruit. Okay, the way the high-ranking officer addresses the recruit is different from the way the recruit addresses the high-ranking officer. Also, the boss-secretary kind of interaction. The secretary calls her boss by his family name and a title of address. Mr. Johnson, could I leave for a couple of hours? Whereas when it comes to the boss, he addresses her by her first name, Jane. Get this type out for me now. Okay, the use of first name versus the use of a title of address plus family name. Note that the use of titles of address is a characteristic of negative politeness, whereas the use of first names and endearing terms is characteristic of positive politeness. The next thing I want to mention here is something called conflictive politeness, which simply means that politeness is not a token of an utterance, but rather is a token of the situation rather than an utterance, the way it is usually interpreted. Okay, so what seems to be highly polite linguistically may turn out to be not polite in a certain situation. So you can imagine, for example, a wife addressing her husband saying, "Would you be kind enough to open the window?" Notice that the utterance is extremely polite. All right. Linguistically, it's extremely polite. But do you think it's meant to be polite in that way? And answer is not. Why? Because it's not customary in husband-wife interaction to produce utterances like that. A wife would address her husband by his first name rather than by using a high degree of modality. This simply means that the wife here is boiling inside. She's so angry with her husband. That's why she has opted for such an utterance, which seems to be extremely polite. But in fact, it indicates how angry the wife is. Thus, linguistic politeness is not a token of an utterance in isolation, but rather is a token of a situation. This is further proved by the fact that not every FTA can be done politely, regardless of how much effort you exert to be polite. Asking someone to stop picking his nose, or asking someone to stop snoring. Or you can imagine other FTAs like that. Is there a polite way of asking someone to stop picking his nose? Regardless of what you say, the addressee will be offended. So linguistic politeness is tied to a situation. It's really a big mistake to talk about linguistic politeness as tied by individual utterances. It's true, we can teach our students how to mark their utterances for linguistic politeness by the use of modality, by the use of endearing terms, things by doing things off record and things like that. But at the end of the day, linguistic is a token of a speech event or a situation rather than the mere speech act or the mere utterance. It's not a token of an utterance, but rather it's a token of a situation. Make sure that you are linguistically polite when you engage in communication. Thank you very much and goodbye.